I heard the bride's brother only has a middle school education. It would be a disgrace for the family to be associated with such poverty. At my dear sister's wedding, as I shed tears over her beautiful appearance, wishing our late father could see her, my father-in-law suddenly began mocking me during his speech. Maybe I should prescribe some medicine for stupidity. He seemed to be trying to get laughs, but he was the only one chuckling. The troublesome person, ruining the celebratory atmosphere, continued to direct insults at me. Just as everyone started feeling uncomfortable, my sister began to laugh. My father-in-law looked at her in confusion. Then, with a stern expression, she addressed him coldly. With those words, he realized who he had insulted and regretted everything he had said. My name is Kevin Johnson. My father was a small business owner who was fairly successful, so our family of 4, including my parents and sister, lived comfortably. With financial stability, I focused heavily on my studies. Of course, I also valued my responsibilities in committees and friendships. As a result, I was seen as a top student with a good reputation. I was proud of this and worked even harder. I was always surrounded by people and never experienced any misfortune. I lived a life completely free from despair. However, my life took a drastic turn after an accident. It was winter of my second year in middle school. Just as I was about to focus seriously on preparing for high school, my father, Mike, died in a car accident. This caused my mother to become severely depressed and bedridden. Already frail and often ill, she ended up staying in the hospital for a while. Additionally, we discovered that my father had debts. The business seemed successful, but it only appeared that way. With the cost of repaying debts and covering the funeral expenses, our savings were nearly depleted by the end. After these events, I decided to forego high school. I needed to support our daily expenses, my mother's medical treatment, and my sister Emily's education. With no qualifications beyond middle school, I was hired as a waiter at a restaurant. A friend of my father, aware of our situation, offered me a job at his establishment. However, that alone wasn't enough to sustain us, so I delivered newspapers and did some home-based work in my spare time. By the time a year had passed since my middle school graduation, my mother's health had improved enough for her to handle household chores and some light work. Mom, Kevin, I'm going to give up on high school and work too. I can't let you both carry all the burden. Emily, who was about to take her high school entrance exams, once said this. What are you talking about, Emily? Don't worry about the house. Follow your dreams. That's right, Emily. You've always said you wanted to go to college. But both my mother and I rejected her idea. I didn't want her to give up on what I had to. Moreover, thanks to our efforts, our life was finally stabilizing. Although we couldn't call it comfortable, it wasn't bad enough to crush Emily's dreams just to help out. We're managing fine, so you should follow your own path. Kevin. After repeating this a few times, Emily finally agreed. Another year passed. I got into high school. Happily, Emily's path after graduating from middle school has been decided. It's a nationally renowned private preparatory high school. Showing us a postcard, she proudly announced her acceptance. In the center was the word accepted in bold letters. And look here. This is. Where she pointed, it read Scholarship A. This designation was for the top 5 scorers among the applicants, covering all expenses from admission to graduation. That's amazing. Way to go, Emily. Apparently, she had studied intensely to earn this scholarship, wanting to relieve us of financial burdens. Her results showed outstanding language skills, ranking at the top nationwide. Despite our advice not to worry about the family, she did it anyway. I felt immense pride and gratitude for her efforts. Another 3 years went by. Emily continued her hard work in high school and was accepted into college. Moreover, she qualified for a grant-based scholarship. Since the campus was out of state, she would start living on her own. While I felt a twinge of sadness, I wholeheartedly celebrated her new chapter. Seeing her chase her dreams so diligently made me as happy as if it were my own success. Time flies, and it's been a little over 4 years since Emily graduated from college. By that time, life had completely stabilized. While my mother still had occasional health issues, she had mentally recovered to the state she was in before my father's passing. Emily, now a college graduate, worked in the secretary department of a major corporation. I heard she was highly regarded for her quick learning and excellent performance. Though the department had many experienced secretaries, she was thriving without falling behind. Then, unexpectedly, Emily announced she was getting married. Her fiancé was an executive at her company, the current president's son. His name was Michael, I believe. Despite being the president's son, he was a humble and sincere person. Known for his kindness and popularity, it was an honor for me as her brother that such a man chose her. I felt a father's relief that she hadn't ended up with someone unsuitable. Our families were set to meet. Unfortunately, our mother fell ill at that time. To fill in that gap, I attended on short notice. I participated in the formal meeting as a stand-in for my father. Thank you for coming despite the bad weather. Michael's father, Mr. John Smith, began his greeting. Being the president of a major corporation, he was a commanding presence. When I inquired about his wife's absence, he unexpectedly replied, "My dear wife passed away a few years ago." I blundered. I should have asked Emily more about them. I'm terribly sorry to hear that. I didn't know. The atmosphere grew tense and awkwardly silent. During this time, the sound of the rain was the only thing that loudly raged outside. As John mentioned, today was unfortunately pouring rain. Emily is truly a remarkable young lady. John seemed quite fond of Emily, continually praising her intelligence and beauty. The college she graduated from is also impressive. Emily graduated from a nationally renowned private college, and he showered praises about that as well. It's such an honor to have someone like Emily join our company and become my son's wife. Truly, we are grateful. Thank you. While I appreciated the compliments about Emily, his persistence made me chuckle awkwardly. By the way, John's beaming face grew slightly serious as he looked directly at me. When I returned his gaze, he continued, "Which college did you graduate from?" Well, I suddenly asked about my education. I hesitated to answer as someone who only had a middle school diploma. Compared to Emily's stellar record, attending a prestigious high school and college, there was a significant gap. But there was no point in lying about my background. Dishonesty would eventually come to light. So, I decided to be honest. I didn't attend college. Due to various family circumstances, I started working after middle school. Oh. Is that so? Well. John seemed surprised and laughed awkwardly. After that, he started to ponder deeply, murmuring, Actually, my brother didn't go to high school because... Sensing my explanation might be lacking, Emily tried to add more context. However, John interrupted her. No need to explain further. I'm sure there are reasons you can't discuss. Though his words were polite, it was clear he looked down on me for my lack of education. He has a face closer to a smirk than a smile. Moreover, the end of his earlier words was slightly high-pitched, and a stifled laugh escaped his ha-ha. Thank you for waiting. Here is the appetizer course. At that moment, the waitstaff brought out the first course of our meal. Both families were in full support of the marriage, so the meeting was supposed to be enjoyable. However, a single exchange caused an awkward tension. As the luxurious dishes kept coming, I found myself too distracted to enjoy the food. On the day of Emily and Michael's wedding, I was moved to tears by the combination of her beautiful makeup and stunning wedding dress. Don't cry before me, Kevin. Sorry. I was to walk her down the aisle in place of our late father, but at this rate, I worried about holding it together. It's time to enter. The coordinator guided us to our positions. The doors swung open, and the loud music filled the room. Honestly, my memories from that point on are a blur. Whether it was due to intense nerves or the tears in my eyes, I couldn't see clearly. I only remember my heart being full from the emotions built up over the years. After our father passed away, Emily worked hard to minimize her educational costs, facing countless challenges. Please take care of Emily, I whispered to Michael as I entrusted her to him. He quietly responded, I will. With that reassurance, I wiped my eyes with a handkerchief and returned to my seat. After that, the reception proceeded smoothly, with John giving a formal closing speech. He began with, "Today, my son," and continued talking at length. He must have spoken for about 15 minutes. Just as he seemed to be wrapping up. Just as I thought it was over, another topic began. Speaking of colleges, he glanced in my direction. I heard that Emily's brother has only a middle school education. When he revealed my educational background, the room buzzed with murmurs. Whether they were mocking my education or disapproving of John's comment was unclear. Emily has an impressive background, but to be associated with a brother who was only a middle school graduate, well, it's quite a disgrace for the family. Still lost in my own emotions, I was almost singled out and mocked by John. Of course, I felt anger, but another emotion took precedence. Maybe I should prescribe some medicine for stupidity. John spoke into the microphone, half laughing. He seemed to be aiming for laughs, but he was the only one laughing. This troublesome man, who had dampened the joyous occasion, continued to hurl insults at me for a while. Well, that concludes my speech. Satisfied, he abruptly ended his speech and set down the microphone. Ordinarily, applause would follow, but the guests were stunned. They were, as the saying goes, pulling back in shock. Then, laughter began to break the uncomfortable silence. Everyone looked around in surprise. Emily. After a few seconds, I realized it was Emily who was laughing. John watched her with a puzzled expression. Though he didn't say it, his face clearly asked, "What's so funny?" Even as he stared, Emily kept laughing, holding her stomach. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes from laughing so hard, and I worried her makeup might get ruined. After laughing for a while, she let out a weary ah, and then looked at John with a serious expression. "John, you really should recognize your shareholders' faces." "Excuse me? Shareholders?" Michael nodded in agreement with Emily, glaring sharply at John. "Don't you remember that Kevin attended our shareholders' meeting? He's a major shareholder in our company." I hadn't known all the details about John, such as his late wife's passing. However, I didn't expect him to be unaware of who I was. At the family introduction, I thought my introduction was merely formal. But to him, it was genuinely his first time meeting me. "What? What?" John could only respond with confusion. He seemed utterly flustered. "Well then." I stood up slowly and walked toward him. Emily's background is impressive, but what was that again? He was too shocked to speak. He must have realized, from Emily's words, who I was and what he had just done. My father had owned a substantial amount of stock. When he passed away, I was still in the 8th grade. I was too young to manage such investments. Thus, my mother became the official heir to the stocks. However, my mother wasn't in a good mental state at that time, so the inherited stocks remained untouched for a while. By the time Emily entered college, my mother's mental health had significantly improved. She finally had the capacity to consider the inherited stocks. Upon thorough examination, we discovered that most of the companies my father had invested in had grown substantially, providing us with more than enough to escape our precarious financial situation. Thanks to this, our lives stabilized, and my job at the restaurant was sufficient to cover our needs. During this period, I became interested in stocks and started investing our surplus funds, following in my father's footsteps. Slowly, I continued to increase our holdings, eventually becoming a major shareholder in John's company. Even though it was a company mentioned in my father's notes, looking back now, I think it was a very risky approach. I was saved because this company succeeded. "I'm disappointed in you, Dad." Michael addressed John, who stood trembling in shock. "I always respected you for growing our business as the president." "Michael." John began to shake, calling Michael's name as he snapped back to reality. "But not recognizing a major shareholder's face? That's unacceptable for a president. And before that, how could you insult someone like that? Especially a family member?" John, now tearful, muttered Michael's name repeatedly. "Sorry to say this, Dad, but you're the disgrace to the family." Michael strongly reprimanded him, using John's earlier words against him. John groaned, "Ugh," then looked at me resentfully with his paled face. "Why would a middle school graduate buy our company stock?" Pointing weakly at me, he questioned. His question made no sense anymore. "Does one need a degree to buy stocks?" I replied in exasperation, causing John to blush and look down. If you must know, my father left notes indicating which stocks to buy. Ever heard of James Johnson? When I mentioned my father's name, John's face turned from red to ashen. He was in an accident. His trembling was severe. Seeing this, Michael called the staff to escort John away and declared the wedding over. There were 2 reasons I bought shares in John's company. 1, because Emily worked there. And 2, as I mentioned, it was recommended in my father's notes. Most of my father's stocks were in businesses of his associates. John's company was one of them, but I never imagined Emily would join it and marry Michael. Intrigued by this miraculous connection, I investigated further after the family meeting. I found several suspicious points. It seems my father and John were business partners. I said over the phone to Michael, sharing my findings. Yes, I remember the name James from when I was a kid. My father died when I was in 8th grade, and since Michael is the same age as Emily, he would have been in 6th grade then. My father's schedule book notes that on the day of the accident, he had a meeting with John. Interesting, and what kind of business were James and my father involved in? Let me see. I pulled out some confidentiality agreements and other documents from my father's files and read the business details aloud. That business, Michael exclaimed, explaining that the venture was what had propelled John's company to rapid growth. From what we pieced together, it seemed that my father and John were working on a promising project, but after my father's untimely death, John continued alone and succeeded immensely. A troubling story began to take shape, but it was too early to draw conclusions. We were missing the connection between the rising action and the climax and resolution. To clarify, we need records from when my father took over James's work. I'll investigate within the company. Sure, please do. If it becomes too much to handle alone, feel free to ask Emily for help. I'll inform her as well. I see. A little time passed after the wedding. Michael visited John's room and office, who had been hospitalized due to the severe stress. With Emily's help, they thoroughly investigated and discovered records from when the business was taken over. The words are carefully chosen to sound good, but essentially, it says, the deceased's wife, who is the heir, is mentally ill. So we can do whatever we want. Using my mother's grief-stricken condition after my father's death, John forced an overwhelmingly advantageous contract. I felt a deep-seated anger, but rushing things could undermine our painstaking investigation. I urged Emily to remain calm as well. Now, we had the missing connection in the story. About a month later, John had returned, but he was far from his former self. At times he would ramble incoherently, other times he would wander out to drink heavily. It must have been painful for Michael to see him in such a state, but he approached him for the sake of the investigation. I picked up my drunk father from a bar and managed to create a one-on-one situation. Michael informed me over the phone. He confessed, with a bizarre sense of pride, that he tampered with James's car brakes. Michael's voice, on speakerphone, began to tremble. His voice cracked, and I could hear him sniffling. He also admitted to burdening James's wife with debts and taking over the business. He did it to monopolize James's business and grow his own company. Emily and I were left speechless. The cause of my father's death might not have been an accident. It could have been an intentional act orchestrated by the despicable John. Even being confronted with such a possibility, anyone who could still speak fluently would be abnormal. Facing such a grim reality, we couldn't even cry. All we heard were Michael's sobs and apologies over the phone. But since my father's death was nearly 10 years ago, there is no clear evidence that John deliberately tampered with the brakes to cause an accident. It's just something he mentioned when he was drunk. How could we hold him accountable? After much thought, I demanded his resignation as president, leveraging my position as a major shareholder. Even though he was Michael's father, his disgraceful behavior at a public event like the wedding had severely tarnished his reputation. As Michael mentioned, he had been neglecting his duties and was heavily dependent on alcohol. His credibility was already in shambles, and there was little opposition to his resignation. With Michael's support, another executive was promoted to president. After that, I focused on locating the mechanic who had worked on my father's car. Michael took a leave of absence to assist me. He repeatedly declared with strong determination, "I will settle my father's old scores." I genuinely thought he was cool. At the same time, I felt he would be a wonderful husband to whom I could confidently entrust Emily. 1 year after starting the investigation into John and my father. At such a pivotal moment, we finally succeeded in identifying the mechanic who had tampered with the brakes. He was a simple worker at a small, rural repair shop. Or rather, a former worker. Upon realizing his actions had caused a man's death, he quit his job and became a recluse. When Michael explained the situation regarding John, the former mechanic, Tom, confessed with large tears streaming down his face. At that time, the workshop was small, and I couldn't make enough to support my family. He recounted his traumatic past, his voice trembling. Then your father showed up with the blueprints. He asked me to modify the car as specified, promising a generous reward. As a mechanic, I knew the blueprints were suspicious. But I was blinded by the money. John's offered sum was staggering. I wrestled with guilt. Should I confess my crime? But I was terrified of being punished and even more of John's retaliation. I was utterly petrified. From the fear and guilt, he shut himself in his room. The wife and children he had wanted to protect left him, and he continued to live alone, barely getting by. He told us this in a voice barely above a whisper. Would you like to go to the police with us? I suggested to Tom, who was still trembling. Wanting to atone for his sins, he nodded vigorously, his eyes red from crying. Tom confessed to the police about the incident, no, the crime. He admitted he had been directed by John, took the money. Because of that, James left this world. All of it. Based on his testimony, John was taken in for questioning as a person of interest. After a thorough investigation into his actions and misconduct, John was officially arrested. Even though John was arrested, it wouldn't bring my father back. There was no sense of achievement, just an empty routine. One day, when I returned home, I noticed an unfamiliar luxury car parked in our driveway. Wondering what was going on, I entered the house to find Emily and Michael in the living room. My mother was serving coffee, and it seemed their visit and my return happened almost simultaneously. I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced. Sorry for the sudden visit without any notice. I don't mind, but what's the occasion? You both seem very formal. Both were dressed in formal attire for some reason. Actually, there's something I need to discuss with you, Kevin. Michael spoke solemnly. What my father did is unforgivable. As the son of such a despicable man, it is equally unacceptable for me to marry James's daughter. I believe we should part ways. To my surprise, Michael began to talk about breaking up with Emily, tears welling in his eyes. Judging by Emily's calm demeanor, they had already discussed this. If you really want to break up, then you should. You're both adults and free to make your own choices. Kevin. But only if that's what you truly want. Michael looked at me, puzzled. If you're saying this out of a sense of responsibility for John's actions, that's a different story. What? Michael's eyes widened at my words. The responsibility for what John did lies with him. You were just a child then. You don't bear that burden. So, instead, I have a request. I asked Michael. Ignoring his confusion, I continued. If your feelings for Emily haven't changed, could you please make her happy? Kevin. You're right. My feelings haven't changed. I still want to be with Emily with all my heart. When I looked up, Michael was crying as he spoke. Emily, sitting beside him, was hiding her face in her hands, blushing. Emily, are you okay with this? Yes, thank you, Kevin. Their emotions seemed to spread, making me feel a bit embarrassed too. To cover it up, we all laughed together for a while, including my mother. The sun was setting, painting the sky a deep orange. Hearing a few crows cawing, I stood before my father's grave and put my hands together in prayer. Long time no see, Dad. I opened my eyes and began recounting everything that had happened recently. It happened last year, but Emily got married. Her husband is an executive at her company, and he's a very sincere person. The flowers I had placed swayed in the wind, as if nodding in agreement. It seemed that my father was pleased with Emily's happiness. I then briefly mentioned the man named John, who had once been my father's business partner. But don't worry, Dad. The man who deceived you has been brought to justice. The verdict hasn't been delivered yet. But he's admitted his guilt and appears to be remorseful. What kind of punishment John will face remains unknown. Will he regret his actions? Will he apologize to my father? That's up to him, and it's something I can't predict. Tom, who tampered with the brakes, feared retribution from his employer and kept silent about his crime. Similarly, John might have been living in fear of someone's revenge. His extraordinary shock at Emily and Michael's wedding. It seemed to indicate the answer. How did he feel, standing on the ill-gotten pedestal of his position? And now, having lost his status and social credibility, what must he be feeling? I might be a bad person for hoping that he experiences the same pain my father did. But I want to live my life with integrity. I want to be a strong person who can be proud of himself and never have to feel ashamed. I told my father these wishes and left the cemetery.